question about symbols, because it seems
Yeah.
as if the ancients really wrote in symbols, and even these star maps are symbols. What is the significance of symbols? Why were they so important, and why were they used so extensively back then?
Yeah, that's something I've never been asked before, but I think the easiest way to reason that would perhaps be the earliest writings were pictoglyphs or pictures, like a man walking, doing something, and from cave paintings they developed into simple sort of symbols, as the word describes, little pictographs and short versions of these pictures and telling a story. And over time, I would say became, in some languages, became completely, let's say, evolved in many different ways, and into something that had no resemblance to pictures, and became words and speech.
So, but now even today, because I think that as we continue to talk later on, we'll bring all of this up later on, but even some of the major cities are built symbolically according to your research. So that they're still using these symbols. Do you see any significance in that and in their designing some of these cities according to these star maps?
Yeah, there are some common symbols that seem to have had meaning in all cultures, and in a way almost universal symbols that are common in all languages, which is very strange because in theory, each civilization would have, in theory, started its own writing. However, all of them seem to have connections in some way. So it seems to be this outside connection of common important symbols that are sacred and tell a story that's been forgotten.
Let me ask you this too. Now, when you after you had compiled a sufficient amount of notes in your research, and you were at a point of trying to put them all together, and then you read some works by Dr. Robert Bauval, and it seemed to really orient you into a specific way of thinking and into a specific line of research. First of all, who is Dr. Bauval, and how did that what did you read that influenced your research so much?
Yeah, I don't believe he's a doctor, but Robert Bauval, the author, is probably the pioneer of identifying the star secret of the pyramids, and that's quite an amazing thing. He put it really on the map to start with. He had the basis identified. And his interpretation was mainly the three pyramids of Giza with the three stars of Orion, and he had a template that he thought would explain it just using the larger pyramids. For example, the two other larger pyramids in Saqqara, the Red Pyramid, and I'm trying to think of the other one. Anyway, but basically using mainly the big pyramids as part of the star map, but leaving out the little ones. And I just simply went back and re-looked at it and seeing if it was possible to fit the whole cosmos in one 360-degree star view of 50 pyramids matching a string of 50 stars, and that seemed to tell the complete story.
Now, but let me ask you this: these pyramids were not all built at the same time, though, were they not?
How do you date these things? There's quite a very I would say that the best way to look at it is the earliest part of Egypt, for example, was around the area of Memphis, and Memphis was by the chance, the middle of the pyramid field. It's quite likely they started with some of the biggest ones first in Giza, and you never know, but perhaps these things were built in a matter of a 20-year plan. To me, that's still pretty much at the same time. But there was, for example, Sneferu, who built 3 of the pyramids, in his lifetime. So these things are going up a lot quicker than people would like to accept.
Well, the only question that I would have is the structure of the Giza pyramids and their size is so different, at least from what I understand, from the other pyramids that are in Egypt, that it would almost indicate that they had some larger purpose, or maybe they were built, by a different group of people. Would you agree with that?
Not really. If you think, for example, let's take the step pyramid. Looks like a very rough, raw, experimental kind of first pyramid being built, and then you look at Giza and you see, whoa, these blocks are, were dressed a lot better and a lot smoother, a lot bigger. There is some slight variances in some of them, but you'll see that the inside of even of Giza, right in the very inner parts, are very rough and very raw, and perhaps a step pyramid shape structure is underneath some of the better ones as well. So I think every single one of them had a clear, smooth outer surface, and that's something that's yet to be proven. But over a 20-year period, depending on who the builders were in that over that 20 or 30 year, whatever it was, it's still pretty much in one lifetime. It's quite likely that they all went up in one sort of period.
And would you say that would be the same for the other pyramids as well, that are around the planet?
Speaking on the Mayan would be probably the biggest one out of the whole lot. The Olmec, Aztec, Mayan. I think those were over a much longer period, and the whole religion, the whole belief and blueprint, if you can call it seemed to vary towards the end of their civilization. Perhaps about 1,000 years ago, it became a whole different basis for building them. For example, they were building them towards the end of their civilization, celebrating periodic cycles with two pyramids going up as pairs, celebrating a time span matching the Mayan calendar, which is completely different to how it seems they were built in the beginning, which was to map the stars.
Okay. And since we're on the subject of pyramids, and then because there's so much that you've researched and so much I'd like to touch on, I don't want to stay on the pyramids, but I do want to ask you this. The pyramids that have been recently discovered in Eastern Europe, how do you feel they fit into the star map and into your research?
In fact, I think every single one, and I don't think there's one that stands out differently. For example, Göbekli Tepe is the one that's on the map at the moment. They're not hardly pyramids, but there are these sort of Stonehenge type, let's call them buildings, or whatever you want to call them, but had some sort of megalithic structure. Every single one of them, and I include Stonehenge as well, of course, seem to have the same sun worship connection. They seem to have the same star measuring obsessions, and definitely I think all of them seem to be tied into visitors, gods that came down from the sky.
Let's go back now to Egypt, and let's go to the Sphinx for a minute, because I believe in your work you say that the Sphinx was built before the pyramids. That is correct?
Yeah, I would go with that. I would say the Sphinx might not have been. Look, nobody will ever really be able to prove this. I would say the most logical way of looking at the Sphinx is taking Robert Skoch's discovery that it has rain erosion on it. And if you look at it very carefully, it's sand and rain that have gullied down and eroded some of those blocks. It's very, very likely it is the oldest. But I think it's quite likely Memphis was the beginning of a civilization. My own personal theory is it's quite likely that the Sphinx was the ground zero landing monument.
Okay, that would be for Ra and in his spaceship.
Well, yeah, this is the thing. How do we prove Ra came in a spaceship? And it is luckily some of my newer work that I think I found the literal blueprint of what it looked like.
Let me ask you this. Who is Ra?
I think the best way to describe him is he is the great figurehead of the first landing party of the people who founded Egypt. Yeah.
No, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut into you there. I did want to ask you this. Is this the same deity as Amun-Ra or Amun-Ra, or is it a different one?
I think it's the same. Variations of the belief has, I think, evolved over time, and I think even in the beginnings, even the fundamental basis of their religion being this creational God with Nut and Geb even that varies. So the real earliest, let's call it mythology, is variant. So to be exactly sure, it's hard to say, but I would say Ra still stands out as one of the earliest and the most important.
So can you tell us a little bit about that and how it affected and influenced Egyptian civilization, the coming of Ra onto the planet?
Yeah, in the earliest sort of records of mythology of Egypt, it has this creational myth with Nut being a female goddess stretched forth over the heavens, and from her womb gives birth to a son. And historians have said, well, that's probably our son being born. But if you look at the context of Nut and the womb, the sacred feminine in its position, looking at all the images, there's about 8 of them that seem to depict a very tiny little sun-like star, and it's in reference to a position of a leg symbol. Now, the leg symbol, according to some of the coffin lids found with the priestess of Hathor and a few others, show that it is a group of 7 stars, and it has the shape that it depicts a leg-type shape. When you look at the collective 7 stars, and it's a bull's leg, and it's in Taurus. And it's not our sun at all. That's a huge difference. So my work contradicts the basis of sun worship being, it's not really our sun, but yes, they did worship a sun, but it's a sun-like star. But it's not ours. It's somewhere in Taurus. It's something that our ancestors came from, somewhere in space in Taurus.
You don't have a particular theory as to which star it was?
Yeah, so once you get all these star maps together, for example, Stonehenge, look at the template, look at it from above, and all the others, and compare this ground zero, most important monument position in reference to this cluster of 7 monuments nearby, you can simply go into a star program and measure what fits with which I thought was the Pleiades, and see what star comes into contention that fits into that point.
Okay. Do you mention that star in your book by any chance?
Yes. According to the data at the time, in 2002 when we published it, we have a sun-like star that fits in that position right about 17,000 years ago. I still think that is the highest probability of being the solution to it, because it fits in such a neat way, especially in the Mars star map, where it lands on the forehead of the most amazing monument on Mars, the Mars face. It lands right in the middle of the forehead, in position at a specific date. So I'm still pretty sure that is the right one. It's about 300 to 400 light years distance, exactly like our sun, class G spectral type, and it's there. You can measure it.
It's in the Pleiades, that particular star?
It's near the Pleiades. The Pleiades are pretty much a sky landmark, if you can call it that. It's a reference position. If you look at the size of the Pleiades and measure one length of that Pleiades star shape and follow down the leg shape, it actually follows this leg is literally a pointer in the sky to find the position of it. So it's a matter of an overlay to measure its exact position.
So then you are saying that our ancestors, or the ancestors, that certainly the ones that Ra and his entourage would have come from a planet within that particular star system where that sun shone.
Absolutely. Flesh and blood gods, our ancestors, coming from a sun-like star system, and it's a tradition that seems told in so many different ways in different cultures, the exact same story in all different cultures around the world.
Then my question would be, because given the diversity of human races now, through the black, the white, the brown, the red, yellow, would it have been one specific race from that star system, according to how you feel and what your research has done, or would it have been maybe different races? Is it a possibility that other star systems may have also contributed to our DNA as well?
Yeah, the story is quite complex. It actually starts with this one star being the most important near the position of the Pleiades in exact reference to it, and there's another 2 that are in contention as well for other parts of the civilization beginnings. For example, Angkor Wat has a star reference using the Pleiades in cross-reference to another constellation, Perseus, and it seems to be favoring a star that is in the secondary position. There's like these three in a triangle. I think it's the beginning of a solar trinity religion in Sumeria and in Egypt. They spoke about three sun deities, a father, a mother, and a son personified for each of these stars, which is quite weird that they have to personify the story to teach people, and they've done it in all different cultures and religions as well. So it's evolved, and I think when Constantine started Christianity, the old habit of the solar trinity became a spiritual trinity fitting the Christ, and they took the woman out of the picture and had a Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, which is pretty interesting too. So there's actually three different stars in contention that are all sun-like, that are all in the area referenced around this Pleiades cluster of 7 stars.
Okay. All right. That's so. Now, I guess my next question would be: so can we say then that our ancestors are, well, let me ask you this way. The Pleiadians, for instance, because people talk about them all the time. They talk about the Orions, they talk about the Syrians, people from Sirius. Or do you think that does that fall into your research as well, or is that sort of outside and apart from it in terms of fitting into what the conclusions you've come up with?
Yeah. If you follow back these new, let's call them cults, New Age cults that have given names to different groups of aliens, etc. To be quite honest, a lot of it I think is hearsay. It's not a direct thing that has passed through history. If you go back just, I would say, 50 years, you'd probably find the only reference to any kind of star being spoken as Pleiadians would be some of the American Indian tribes referred to them as ancestors from the area near the Pleiades. But what you see today seems to be a whole new story. It's from people that have claimed to have made contact with beings that have come down, and you'll see the common thing is they use the Pleiades again in this reference, and people would simplify it and just say they're Pleiadian. I think the Billy Mayer story was based on a real story. He's the ground zero for the Pleiades cult following that we have in modern times, and I would go as far as saying his first book, his first original story, is probably the real deal. Real UFOs, real contactee with this Pleiadian reference person, but it's still not in the Pleiades. I think when he told the story, the best way to tell it was Pleiadian. But the Pleiades are hot blue giant stars, and any sun-like star system near that hot blue star is going to be fried with radiation. There's no possible chances for life in that group of those 7 ridiculously hot stars. So it's quite likely these are just references, like the ancients have shown, near this area, probably a lot closer to us. For example, the 7 stars of the Pleiades are around about 700 to 800 light years away, come a lot closer and to the size of it, and in the 200 light year distance, then it's highly probable it's completely far away from it, and it would look like it looks here on Earth, but maybe 7 times bigger. So in that reference, it's still not Pleiadian, if you can put it that way. It's a reference near that star group, and that's really how it seems to have evolved.
Now, what about the Orions? I mean, the Egyptians, what about them? Because they really do also figure in.
Yeah, I'm totally against a lot of these Syrians, Arcturians, Galactic Federations. To me, I think it's all... Its basis is all New Age and completely out of control. There's so many new stories coming out from people who are mediums, and to be quite honest, I think a lot of it's fantasy.
Okay, but that doesn't still fall very far from what it is that you seem to put forth in your book. That is that we were seeded by ETs, and that they've always still been around. So if some people maybe are in touch with those different entities that you feel are still around, maybe they've just given them names per se, but if they have been around, don't you feel that they would at least be in touch with people if, the circumstances were right?
I've looked at a lot of these contactee cases. In fact, that was my first level of study from the 1990s. The whole of the 1990s I spent looking at UFO contactees and looking at the full background, the makeup of the people, the witnesses who saw the great light that came down, etc. And out of all of them, I think there's only about 3 or 4 cases that stand out in my mind that are the real deal. The rest basically had very little to go on, and they seem to evolve as their publishers demanded more books from them. So I'm a real skeptic when it comes to a lot of this New Age stuff. Having seen these ancient historical documents, having a near-death experience and seeing a spiritual aspect of things as well, it would be the most important teaching with these visitors to be shown what I've basically revived, and not one of them, not one single case except the Billy Mayer case came close to it. So the others just seem to leave it out, and that would be an important part that would have been taught to humanity again, is who we are and where we come from. Yet none of these seem to cover it at all. It was weird stuff about federations and this council, and it just didn't make any sense.
What do you? And I'll get off of this after this last question about ETs. What about the Greys? Everybody talks about the Greys.
Absolutely.
Everybody.
The Greys you find them all the way through history. In the Egyptians, the Ankh symbol is based on a small entity, which I showed on the oneism.org site, oneism.org. You click angels, and you'll see the Egyptian tradition of this Ankh. It's a strange, let's call it an arm and head type entity, very small, half the size of a human. It seems to be given life in a lot of them, personified with arms and legs, and it's still this grey head, this strange shaped head that takes the Ankh symbol. And an origin of it, the fertility god, for example, of the whole of northern Africa is based on a similar pattern, and it's shown with a big head and big eyes. You'll find it pretty much throughout a lot of the ancient civilizations, and a lot of them speak about it in some weird kind of mythology, like gremlins, trolls, demons. I'm trying to think of them, fairies even. All these strange stories, fairy stories, if you want to call them, are based on these small entities that have the strange magical powers and come in the night and are pretty frightful.
Let's talk about your near-death experience. You were in your mid-20s. I believe it was due to a motorcycle accident. What was that experience like for you?
Yeah, I had an accident where I was knocked out, and at the same time the helmet had pushed into my throat and was choking me, so I was prevented from breathing while I was in this situation, and rescued about 20 minutes later. I was blue. I was out of the body. That experience that is reported by many people that have had near-death experiences, the tunnel of light. And most people get to the end of the tunnel and either told to come back, or they find themselves drawing back to their bodies when they're resuscitated. I was allowed to come back with more than I left with, and that's pretty amazing that for some reason, I don't know what it could be, it could just be coincidence that I was out for a very long time, that I could go and interact at this place at the end of the tunnel. And it's a cosmic tree. It's the most amazing place in the world, and I think people that have had that experience through all ancient traditions have made record of it and shown it in many different ways, but teaching the same thing. This thing really exists. It's the nucleus of the universe.
Is it similar to the Kabbalah life, or is it different?
The Kabbalah is a teaching mechanism where they put in teaching into a tree-like pattern. But that tree-like pattern, I don't think I put it up on my website. If you look at the whole layout of the Kabbalah and look at the early Christian records of the solar trinity, how it turned into the spiritual trinity of Father, Son, and the Holy Ghost, there are some ancient records that show that it's based on the 3 sun-like stars and the 7 Pleiades, all put together in one big layout, and they've made it a dual teaching with ways and qualities of life to achieve great wisdom. So it's kind of a dual teaching thing. But in every single tradition, there seems to be this cosmic tree of knowledge.
This tree of knowledge that you saw,
Hmm.
Tell us, what did it look like? Were the colors? Was it just bright light? What and were you accompanied by anybody? Were you simply being drawn into it alone? Did you see other souls or other individuals as well at the same time?
Now, the weirdest thing about this whole thing is it's so constructed. There's a whole Eden type mountain and city built around it. It's all real physical stuff that's built around this. Call it a cosmic anomaly that maybe was discovered by these little gray entities, because the gray entities have a huge connection in looking after this place. It's like a biosphere with a mountain in it, and this light goes right through the middle of it. It looks like a volcano erupting light. But the light coming out of it is streaming. It's golden. It's living. It's like millions of serpents. If you look at a plasma ball, it's quite an amazing little scientific device you can buy at a hobby shop. It's got a plasma gas, and it has electrode in it. It makes these beautiful blue and red, like electrical discharges inside it. The way those little electrical discharges look, are the best way to describe it. It is like living light and electricity. But if you look at it closely, really, when you have this interaction with it, it looks like a cobra coming at you. One of these serpents, cosmic serpents, I think, are the analysis of what we're looking at here. It's stretched out through the whole cosmos. In this defined area, this is what it's made out of. The whole branches going outwards are millions of these serpent-like plasma ribbons, I think is the best wording to use.
You say serpent. You say serpent-like. Yeah. Were they actually reptilian in form, or is
no,
it just that just describes it?
Plasma, light. It's an energy. It's a plasma is the best description. It's light, probably subatomic level, and it's illuminating, and it's living light. It's the best way to describe it in a plasma.
Okay, and then you entered into it in your travels, or it
yes.
encompassed you, it pulled you into it?
Well, to get there, I think this whole tunnel that you travel down is exactly what it is. It's one of these tubes of this ether, if you can call it that, a plasma type conduit that I think is what souls travel down to get to the roots of it, which is the same thing upside down. It feeds in like a magnetic field, and you feed into it, and I was allowed to interact with it, and this is the weirdest thing about it. It's like a whole built teaching area, like a beautiful paradisial park with even a big viewing area around it, with a big glass like walkway that goes around it, that people are brought there physically to learn about it from all over the universe, perhaps. And people at times are taken there and taught about this, and then go back and teach the people when they return. And this is what I seem to find in ancient civilization. The people that were teaching about it in the old records, that was their job. They had this experience, and it carries through in so many different ways. I mean, if you look at it in the Hindu religion, this Shiva with many arms on top of a mountain or a pillar. We look at it in our biblical essence. It's in the beginning and the end of the Bible. In the beginning, it's the I think it's described in a very different way, with Adam and Eve being the first humans by this tree of knowledge and eating from the fruits of this tree being knowledge. And in Revelation, it says this place in Eden, this light is there. God is that light. And the whole description around it, although it doesn't mention the direct tree analogy too much, only in one or two verses, it's describing the glass-like city, the pearl-like gates, the whole fantastic detail around this Eden is a real place.
And at no time during this experience did you have any interaction with any other entities at all?
Yes. On entering, it was, I think the best way to describe it is a human-like person that has long white hair, and people would want to say, well, that must be Jesus. But I'm pretty sure it wasn't. It was some kind of human-looking person with white hair, a gatekeeper, maybe you can call it that. Very vaguely can remember a portion of that, but I've read so many books about this gatekeeper even before I met it. I'm starting to wonder myself, am I not putting it into the picture, trying to put the story together? But I would say there's about a 70% chance that is a real part of my experience.
Some people would say that would be St. Peter, I suppose. He's supposed to be the one that keeps the gate.
say, really. I mean, the person didn't say who he was.
Well, so you came back to your body then after this. I mean, it must have just been,
Yeah.
how long did it take you to recover and get well? And did you just like immediately just jump up and start going off into research? How did that work?
Pretty much that. I remember when it happened, I was trying to tell my family, when I was resuscitated, there's something really weird that happened, and they thought it was maybe just a knock on the head. But pretty much the next day, I was a different person. I didn't go do the research immediately. It was more just trying to sit back and reason it. And then I became fanatical on things that I had no interest in whatsoever, because now I've been shown two important things. My question I had with this life is, I realized this must be the creation, God, but never ever thought God was a person. So I was very lucky in my own belief, never put a man in a golden chair sitting in the clouds as being God. That just didn't fit. It had to be something like a light nucleus. And so I already recognized this. That might have been the reason I was allowed to interact, because I knew who that was. I knew this was where we come from. And my question was, who are we as physical people, and where do we come from? Who are our ancestors? I was given all that information, almost like a download of all human colonization around the universe and different species, different ways, and how life should be lived. And one of the big things that affected me was what we're doing wrong in our world, what is really out of control and really off track. Our society being run by the super rich, and they are literally starving out the middleman and the poor, and it's getting worse until just the super rich are going to inherit the world, and the middleman and the bulk of the population are going to be working their butts off just to keep the rich happy, and that is way out of perspective compared to what it should be.
Without a doubt.
Yeah.
Without a doubt.
Yeah.
And I think, as I said at the top of the show, I think people are becoming slightly aware that something is a screw, or they are more than slightly aware. I think that they are becoming aware now, slightly, that some of them we may have to step up and really begin to do something about that, whether it's from a spiritual perspective or whether it's from an activist perspective or whatever particular way. Now, you put the book together. Let's talk about the hidden records. Because is this your only book right now?
It's I've actually had two originally to publish, book one and book two, and this one there's a big one on the cover, and we had weird kind of interference, and it actually, that's a whole story on its own. But the book itself has had a lot of interference and a lot of sabotage in the book world, marketing being deleted through all the data banks. It's really a cyber attack on it more than anything. But literally the next day it's disappeared and gone off. For example, Barnes & Noble had it on their books one day, the next day it doesn't exist. And I've given up on trying to make this book get back into the circulation with Amazon in the US. I'm literally looking at a whole different idea now with e-books, although at the moment, would you believe, the person that had my book last, the distributor that had it last, is almost like a Da Vinci Code story. The distributor owner was in the process of trying to take ownership of my book. Can you believe it? Take copyright of my book, and then in that process he didn't pay me a cent, didn't make contact with me, and then he died. Now, it's sitting with Amazon as being, this book might be owned by somebody else now. Sorry, we can't trade it in the whole of the United States. So it's ridiculous what's going on. It's so stupid. And what's happening now is I'm supplying the whole of the U.S. from a British vendor called Book Depository. They are trying to compete with Amazon as well, and they deliver all over the world at no charge, no delivery charges. I don't know how they manage to make anything out of selling books, but they're making it happen. And that's the only way I can make my book available in the U.S.
What is it? What is in that book? That because I know for a while it seemed as if there was also a Google bomb attached to your name when people Googled it. The word hoax would come up. What are people afraid of? What's in that book that people are so afraid of?
It's such a simple thing, but when you think of how powerful it was, just take yourself back 100 years, we would say, well, that's obvious. But today you'd think, well, heck, nobody would stop it for this reason I'm about to tell you. This common thing that is found in every ancient civilization, that the human gene lineage, number one, is all equal. We all come from ancestors that came here and colonized. Every single race and religion group was all tied into a really amazing beginning where human life was sacred right in the beginnings and became very destructive, and kingships kept the secret for themselves. Why? Because they wanted to build armies to go and kill the neighbors, kill the foreigners, because it's quite profitable to go and take their gold, take their women and children, enslave them, and build your empire. And this is the whole human habit problem, is we've taken this knowledge, well, they've taken the knowledge, our ancestors, all the super rich, powerful kingships of ages past have held this for themselves and hidden these records. That's why I called the book The Hidden Records. And even to this day, it seems to be groups, secret societies, whatever you want to call them, are holding on to this almost like an emotional ownership of the secret. And now here's Joe Bloggs, who's just written a book and made it public. How dare I, make this a public thing? And that's the attitude. And what I did then is to be more exposed, is to put this thing on the internet, make a lot of it free, and spread my roots all around the world with copyrights and putting it into libraries with the copyright status and things like that, just in case I have this copyright attack, which I'm underway. It's happened in the U.S. So I'm busy with that right now. So luckily I've made that preparation for protecting these records from being covered up.
At what point do you think our ET ancestors stopped making quote-unquote public appearances? For instance, in the beginning, it seemed as if, according to what I understand from your research, Ra would arrive and then enter into the Sphinx, I guess, where the Hall of Records was kept. That would obviously be, I suppose, in full view of the people. And probably the same thing maybe happened in other locations around the world. Certainly, they did claim that the ancestors would come. When did that stop? At what point in history did that stop? And then, so that the other folks, the people in power, could begin to take that information and turn it around and hide it.
Yeah, I think if you look at the patterns that are left behind, the dregs of research that we can look at that hasn't been tampered with too much, the common thing seems to be these visitors were first revered as gods when they revisited ancient civilizations. They seem to teach them farming, teach them spiritual, gentle ways. Right in the early, I'd say 5,000 years to 7,000 years ago, the foundation of society seems based on these gods being great, good people. And it seems in times thereafter, something really went wrong. When they came back again, yes, they were worshipped as gods, but the emotional attachment from these kingships to these gods, they wanted to make themselves of this bloodline as being important, but their people, they were commoners, they were not included, and foreigners definitely in other countries, other places in the world, they were not of this special bloodline. And it seems to be a common thing where all of them, number one, started giving sacrifices to these gods. They were so emotionally attached to try and get them to return again. First it was children, then it was people that would be selected out of the village and sacrificed to the gods. And then in time, obviously, the captives in the armies, they would take the people that they've plundered and raped and pillaged and take them as sacrifices. So it seems all the way through to modern times, we have this warfare and religious differences. It's based on this revisitation of these people. Up until the time of, I would say, the Christ was probably the story that covered, for example, remember how the Christ story began? Mary was visited by an angel. Mm-hmm. That was probably the last visitation where they tried one more time to get the bloodline gene pool replenished with these angelic visitors and their teachers, these children that grew up, Christ being one of them, being a teacher of this story. We murdered the guy. There it is. The last time it happened, I think it was enough is enough. And from that time onwards, been less visible in the skies. And I think the only sort of contactees that have taken place over the last 100 years have been people in remote areas, and it's very secretive. And, for example, the Billy Mayer contact, the Betty Anderson contact, all these sort of events seem to be very away from leaders and people of power. It's been just Joe Public being visited. And until we now stop shooting them out of the sky, because I think our society is blocking further contact, because the belief is that any alien coming this way will be a threat, therefore they should be taken out. And this is the world protocol. And as it is right now in every country except South America, shoot them and let's see who they are and arrest them, and then we'll decide from there. That is still the protocol, and that's got to change if we want to expect visitation. So a whole world protocol is against it.
Okay, now those are some very interesting comments. I just want to say this to our listeners, by the way. Please feel free to call in, I don't know, maybe 15 minutes. And Wayne is here. You have questions or comments you would like to address to him, we would love to hear from you. Now, so much of what you're saying, Wayne, is so close to a lot of what's out there, and yet it's so different. I mean, we hear about the reptilian agenda. We hear about ETs that are maybe not here for our best interests. We hear about presidents who have actually had meetings and treaties that were signed with certain extraterrestrial races. We hear about Roswell. How does all of that fit in to your way of thinking?
I think there's a lot of truth in the Roswell crash. There's a lot of truth in Eisenhower trying to make a deal with these gray entities. There's a lot of, obviously, UFO crash evidence through different parts of the world. Russia has had one at least. There's another one in the U.S. There's a lot of truth, and there's a lot of cover-up with it as well. So it's really hard. It's not really my expertise to say which are real, which are not. But obviously, I'm following a lot of other authors that have shown a lot of evidence for example, the Roswell story has got so much now behind it that one of these days they'll just let us see the remains or the records of the crash. And it's a good question. It's such a well covered up situation. There's so much disinformation out there with the information. It's a good. You'd never be able to say right now what is right and what is wrong. But it's going to. I think clarity is starting to come out. It seems to be some kind of disclosure project on the go, and let's hope that we'll be visited officially, and these sort of things will be made clear with. I think the median we're going to see with the day that we meet visitors officially. Our TV stations are all going to be taken over for a short while with a message coming from an advanced visitation, and they'll be safe in doing it that way, and we'll be able to see what they have to say and go out and measure it.
Okay. Now, what in the hidden records? Because I want to draw our listeners back to that book for a minute, because I would like for them to really become a little clearer on what it is that you are offering the reader through the hidden records that will enhance their understanding of who they are and enhance their understanding of what they can become and what what the ancients had to say.
Yeah, the most important bits are what our society has hidden from us, and which is the star map of the bloodline, the human bloodline, the gene basic origin. That's a story on its own. Obviously, looking at these ancient star maps, ancient tradition, pyramid building, the commons in all of them, and seeing the good and seeing the alien aspect of it. And then obviously the spiritual part is a whole different story, different source. We come from this cosmic tree that the creation is actually not a man, not a person in a golden chair, but this light that gives off souls, and our souls are a gift. And that whole story on its own is same sort of, let's say it makes up our nature, who we are. So half of it is spiritual, half of it is the physical. Put the two together. Once you know who you are, to me and to what I've found how it affects different people, it seems to lift the veil. It seems to give you direction, know where you're going. And everybody that's found out this information, something inside them changes. It's like hypnosis being removed from their mind. They seem to become humanitarian. They seem to become activists. They seem to become cared and directed into making a difference to help improve the world. So this is quite an effect that it has on people. So be warned. If you have a habit of religion, it's going to be tested, but don't worry about it. Just look at this information and let it take its path, and you'll find it'll evolve into your thinking in a matter of a year or 2 years for some people that are very religious.
Back again to the bloodlines, because there was one last question I wanted to ask about that, because also a lot of researchers, Sitchin and many others, state that there was an intermarriage, and obviously there must have been some sort of intermarriage. I believe you state the same thing, because they took the Neanderthals and by mingling their bloodlines. So are you saying then that we all are indeed hybrid, of a hybrid ET origin? Because obviously there's a certain elite group on the planet that actually feel that they either have more ET blood or they have more extraterrestrial blood than anybody else. So are you saying that we all have that?
Absolutely. In fact, every single race has a direct descendant, not directly linked to any hominid on this planet. And if you look at the common design of the human form, it's universal. All the different races could have originated from different parts of the universe. So the difference in races could be more explained from that variance, and colonization here in the groups and the areas that they chose were from colonies from different star systems. But the three seem to be the main contention. So I would still stick to that the basis of what appears to be true. It's a matter of three different sun-like stars seem to have had the authority to colonize this world about 10,000 years ago in a very big way. But it goes back even earlier. There's like probably 100,000 years ago there was another wave of colonization, perhaps experimental, maybe even and I use the word penal colony because Mars was the jewel of the solar system. This planet was still, if you look at the animals that roamed along this world, go back past 10,000 years ago, everything was double the size. I mean, the saber-toothed lions, whatever you call them, saber-toothed felines with these 6-inch teeth, every animal was a lot bigger and a lot more ferocious. It was a pretty dangerous time. Bears were double the size. Wolves were double the size. Something happened 10,000 years ago, another cataclysmic event that Sitchin also covered as well, that seemed to change the evolution. It killed a lot of the larger species, and the smaller ones replaced them, smaller variations that seemed to survive this. It must have been a dark age of maybe 2 or 3 years of really super cold, dark, no sunlight shining period, that only the small creatures seemed to survive from it. And humans, yes, I think I must agree that when they came and revisited these entities from other parts of the universe that are human-like, came in and, yes, found us attractive. We are the same lineage and interbred, the Nephilim, for example, in the biblical text. So there's a lot of cross-breeding, if you can say, replenishing our gene pool, and it happened in a big way in the biblical era, but not so much we think today. Although I'd like to believe that the gray entities have been replenishing our gene pool with human bloodlines from elsewhere. Some women have given birth to half alien, half human hybrids of just different bloodlines of human form. And a lot of people say, well, are these the indigo children? Who can say? I mean, to me, an indigo child is somebody who has a spiritual awakening, whereas I think our gene pool has been replenished all the way along by extraterrestrial human-type bloodlines.
Yes, I even read somewhere that, a lot of the young generation being born are actually born resistant to certain diseases, such as even AIDS, which is really very interesting, and it's not a bit of news that really gets out there a lot. You're familiar with Stephen Greer, right? And the SETI project?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So in one of their disclosure conferences, they stated that there were over 22 different races of extraterrestrials that have been dealt that some of these folks that have been in higher up parts of the government have been dealing with. Do you feel that could be an accurate statement?
I don't know about that many, but I'm pretty sure there's been a couple. The Area 51 research shows that there's very strange folk walking around that area. I'm pretty sure the reptilian agenda is based on those that have made an agreement with, let's say, the parts of the U.S. Secret government, if you can call it that. There's a good probability that they've made arrangements for technology to get some resources, whether they're after gold. That seems to be the biggest rumor, that the gold reserves are all emptied, and we don't know it yet, but they've been letting them take gold, and these sort of stories break, and there's no way of knowing. With so much chaos and so much disinformation out there now, poor humanity is in the dark still. We will get to find these things out, I think, pretty shortly.
Well, it seems like, yes, there does seem to be a lot of uncertainty as to what's true, what's not true, who's informing, who's a disinformant, who's not a disinformant. I tend to think as long as somebody's shedding a light on something other than mainstream knowledge, then they're basically informing, and then the individual has to sort of come to their own conclusion as to what resonates with them. But that's just my own personal way of sort of trying to deal with the abundance of information and the variations. But one of the things that seems to be fairly common, the thread that seems to be fairly common, is that we were seeded extraterrestrially, and that they have still and always been around. That there will be some sort of, maybe there's already assistance going on, but there will be some sort of disclosure, whether on their part or some people feel the government will never do it, so maybe it will happen, as you said, our television sets and maybe even our Walkmans and I'm dating myself, our iPods and, our computers will all be taken over also at the same moment. Now, that would be really fascinating. And maybe we'll have that.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Looking from the trends that are appearing at the moment with all the groups that are researching all these subjects, it seems quite likely we're reaching a period in time where there is going to be a bit of chaos. There is going to be a situation, because there's so many human lives that are suffering from this manipulation of society by our leaders, that the certain level of universal law has been broken, where there's too many people suffering and starving, 2 billion people starving. I think it's more likely 3 billion people starving right now on this planet. That's a universal law that has been broken, and there's going to be intervention, and it's being forced upon our leaders. They seem to know that this disclosure is going to happen, whether they like it or not, and they're trying to bring it in their own way and conform. They have to make changes. I think they've been forced pretty much so, but you know what it's like with these people that have made so many billions, they're not ready to give them up. So they're trying to see how they can make it work for themselves, and I think it's going to be D-Day for them, because I don't think they're going to get away with what they've done. They're going to probably have to put it all back into society, and I hope I'm alive when that still happens.
Well, so do I, and from your mouth to the ears, and I make quote signs of the cosmic tree of life, so that whole thing might indeed occur during our lifetime. Let's step back a little bit again, and I want you to tell me a bit about the Key of Solomon and what that is.
Yeah, halfway through my research, going towards the Hebrew tradition, Israel was founded biblically from what we see in where's the star map in the Bible, and it starts with some of the New Testament sort of clues, like for example in the Matthew text, the 3 kings that follow from the east to find the star associated with the birth of Christ. Is the last little bit of encoded secret that was there and visible to prove that it exists. Number one, it's in the Bible, but an initiate would be able to recognize that sounds like the 3 stars, because they rise on the horizon, follow from the east, correct? The alignment of these 3 stars by amazing situation, this sun-like star is in line with those 3 belt stars of Orion. And you measure 33 degrees as it rises from the horizon. 33 degrees. Now, think about it. In the Hebrew earliest text, where that 33-degree origin in Freemasonry comes from, seems to be a Solomon story. King Solomon speaks of measuring 33 units of the cosmic ruler to find the place of the house of God. And the word for God is Elohim. 2 syllables. Elo is people, him, heavens. People from the heavens in their likeness and in their form seem to be associated with this place in the heavens. And that Key of Solomon is another star map. And the whole Key of Solomon mythology, why it's known as Key of Solomon, is there's a collection of grimoires, and literally it looks like spells. It looks like a real collection of evil, terrible things that has evolved from it, that has been placed in these records to make it look distractive and to have something, a law that is attached to it. If people were caught with it a few centuries ago, they would be burnt as witches, delving into witchcraft. Because the name for demons in the old Solomon story is actually stars. And they decided to tell a story about demons with it and encode the star ticket in this demon story. So it's all manipulation to have law, to take control of people, that if they touch these ancient records that are forbidden, they will be burnt as witches. So the Key of Solomon really is based around one primary cipher. It's a parchment that has let's call it a circular round disc that has puzzle pieces in it. And then next to it, it has the actual key part to unlock it. And the key part is the sacred cross of the churches, but it's shown in a way that it is Orion. It looks like the stars of Orion. And that is the key in unlocking the star map. Once you know that the reference to the star map is using Orion and the puzzle pieces formed together using the Pleiades, and using the two as cosmic coordinates to locate the star, which is the Star of David. I'm sorry to say, it's the Star of King David.
Mm-hmm. Further explain, please. How did it become the Star of King David?
Yeah, well, if you think of the Hebrew tradition of the Star of David, it's two triangles that are merged, and the components of those two triangles are the 6 outer edges and the middle to make 7. It was celebrated with the menorah, which is a collection of 7 candles burning that were kept in people's homes to celebrate 7 cosmic lights. And the connection of this whole story ties in with the King Solomon Testament, which is a record. And it's at the British Library. They've got the earliest version of it, I believe. And if you just read through this thing very carefully, it explains how King Solomon built his temple, and he binds demons with a magic ring. Okay, think about now this story. He's binding demons with a ring, and he tells a story about their positions. And he goes through the whole list of about 40 different demons. He is actually giving the names of Orneus as Orion, Tartarus, Taurus, using all the words, the ancient words for the constellations, and calling them demons, binding them. In astronomy, we group stars together and put lines between them, and that's binding them. As, for example, Orion is made out of about 13 stars. That is binding those stars, those lines. And in this Solomon parchment, it actually draws the stars with little lines coming out of them. You just got to put the pieces of the puzzle together, and it actually makes the Pleiades. And then you see the position that it's in and the orientation. It's measuring it on the east horizon and on the west horizon. So we've got the ecliptic. We've got 4 different coordinates that prove the position of the star. It's exactly where the other ancient star maps have shown its position.
Where did you get your hands on a copy of this?
It was quite difficult at first, because when I knew that there was a whole book of about 100 or 150, there's probably about 130 in the British version, different variations of strange talismans that are like swamping it. You know, which is the right one? How do you get the real one? The first thing you got to do is look for the Hebrew source. And that was a coincidence, or I'd like to think I was guided to it, because that was just what I did by instinct. I mean, straight towards them, looking for a Hebrew version. And I went through page after page, and then there was one where it had the author that has put this whole compilation together. The compilation is the Clavicular Solomus manuscript, and he referred to this as the only basic Hebrew-based, I think he gives it a name, not a talisman, there's a name for it, this strange little piece, this little drawing. And looking at it straight away, I could just see Orion staring back at me as being the sacred cross of the churches. And that's quite a thing to say, you know, that all the sacred crosses of the churches are based on stars. But recently I've made some... Yeah, go ahead.
No, go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead. Recently you were saying?
There was an amazing breakthrough. I just made this recently, and it was finding in Italy a reference to Orion being drawn as a cross, colored around, drawn around the outer shape of it, making it in a cross shape, and an arrow using the belt stars pointing towards, and you won't believe it, it's an alien with a helmet and with knees bent, toes pointed, flying in Belcomona in Italy, an ancient rock drawing. It's over 7,000 years old.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
That's
very
stuff.
interesting. Yeah. I just want to remind our callers please feel free to call in and talk to Wayne or myself. And we do have one of our regular call listeners. Let me just see if I can access him here. We have a new switchboard today, folks, but I don't think it'll give us any problem. Hello, Will. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Great. How are you today?
Okay, pretty good. I'd like to ask your guest one question. What does he believe is the significance of this? Because I've been reading his websites, the 70 metal books from Jordan. Does he believe these are as significant as the Dead Sea Scrolls? And since I'm guessing they're not decoded, they're not totally decoded, and does he have any idea what they're about?
Okay, can I go ahead?
Yes, please.
Okay. Very fortunate enough to get image variations of about 9 of them. They seem to be in the hands of the Jordanian University, and there's some in the Mexican University, and some there's another place. There's 3 different places looking at them, and just recently verified their age, so they're not a hoax. There's a real ancient artifacts around about 1900 years old or 1800 years old. Let's not worry too much about that. But there are ancient records that seem to show the secret side of Christian basis religion, the Christ-based story. They are picked. I'm only looking at the pictographic side so far, because the text in it is really unrecognized. There's variations of Aramaic, Hebrew, and something else, some other name of glyphs that were used around that period. And even then, they've been put in positions that are almost cryptic, that don't even read sense, according to some of the specialists who looked at it. And that was one of the reasons I thought it's a poor fake, because they don't read straight sentences. They're pictographically telling a story in important points. But what I found with them is they're showing parts of Christianity that is missing. Part of the cosmic tree, I believe, is being shown in it. There's one that seems to be the complete star map repeating itself, the same as in my book, and that's what made me do the web page for it. So it's on the hiddenrecords.com site. So I think they are as important in a way, because they haven't been opened yet. These are sealed books. I've looked at 7 pages. There's 70 books, and each book is about at least 6 or 7 pages of these metal plates, very tiny. And the reason they're tiny, of course, is because the person could conceal them on their clothing, and the secret society of that time, could get away with carrying their knowledge with them and told in very simple, short, concise ways. And the pictographic sides of it are absolutely amazing. There's one that shows a cross forming in the sky and something forming from the cross, like it's some kind of cosmic visual anomaly that Constantine was talking about, that it may be part of the cosmic tree, makes this form in the sky at a very sacred time. We don't know, but I think it's very important, and we hope that they will release more information on it.
Okay. Listen, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Will. Thanks for calling, man.
Okay, bye.
Bye. All right, so let's just talk a little bit about that. Wayne, are you there?
Yeah, I'd like to add another very important thing ties to it is, strange enough, where these books were found in a cave in Jordan, a little bit further down the road, is a mound that I found literally, I don't know how the two came together at the same time. I was busy at that time while I was looking at these ancient books, looking at a Masonic Bible that was called a parallel Bible. It had some information on the founding of Israel with Jacob's story, Jacob's ladder, because that's the star map part of the book that the Freemasons have kept as sacred. And this Jacob's ladder story, I was trying to look for the Masonic version of it, and it was speaking about Jacob's story wrestling or fighting with an angel. Now, this is weird. The writing speaks of Jacob, the biblical founder of Israel, was interacting with an angel. I think it's the best way of describing it. And the place where it happened was a place where there was an area they called the face of God. Now, knowing that Mars has this face-like apparition mound, whatever it is, that looks human-like, that there might be one on the earth. That to me was the biggest clue that there might be one in Israel. And then the text actually said that in this place of Jordan on the east bank, near a place called Succoth, Succoth, you will find this place of the face of God. And what did I do? I went into Google Earth, looked for Sukkot because I found the biblical reference to where it was, looked at the Jordan River, looked at the bank that it should be on, zoomed in, and lo and behold, guess what's there? There's another Mars face sitting there on the border of Israel.
Now, that's very fascinating. Did you put that up on your website?
Yeah, it's on the hiddenrecords.com. Click those metal books, and you'll see at the bottom of the story, because it's all tied together with the same area. It's all that history of that same area. This mound, according to archaeologists, is a Bronze Age heap mound that they cannot really decipher what it was for, whether it was a burial chamber. They've tried digging into it from certain angles. They've never really completed it. It looks like a very boring mound because it is so eroded. But if you look at it directly from above, it's got an eye just like the Mars face, a hairline just like the Mars face, part of the mouth area. They've built something over it. There was a temple once on there. There's another amazing piece of history that ties into this weird mound. The mound, by the way, is called Deir Allah. It's actually referring to face of God and in the Eastern tradition. And there's a lot of different meanings for that word, and I've shown it on the website, the origin of those words. But what's so amazing is if you look on the internet for the first plural identification of the word Elohim as people, as being plural, that's where they found that artifact on top of that mound. I couldn't believe my eyes. There's another little piece that just fell into place right there. And this is the ground zero of pretty much humans arriving in that part of the world. So it's really mind-blowing stuff. So that story I think is going to get its break. Go ahead.
What's the significance of the Deir Allah and the face on Mars? And what is the significance of the face on Mars?
Well, yeah, it's showing pretty much in a very, very large way. Why build a giant monument? That's the first question. Why so big and facing the sky? And if you look at what's near these faces, the layout of pillars. Now, in the Jacob's Ladder story, Jacob was told to build pillars on the ground to mark important places that are in the sky. Markers on the ground, monuments, pillars, whatever they are, the pillars like Stonehenge, pillars like in ancient Roman times, or pyramids themselves, they seem to be mapping out the star's position, and the X that marks the spot is the most important monument. For example, the Mars face, the Deir Allah face, in reference to its surroundings. Now, there's not much left around that area in Jordan. The position where I think where the Pleiades are, there's a little village that's built up there. It's also ancient. And it's quite interesting that they chose to build the village in the shape of the Pleiades. But, we're going to have to excavate there to get the truth, and that's not going to happen. I think all those people are quite happy living where they are. To move all their houses to see what's underneath them, then they're not going to want to do that in a hurry. And this, obviously, there's other things found nearby to prove that it's worth excavating. But these star maps all face the sky. Now, here's the huge twist in the story, that these star maps that are using the monuments on the ground, as above, so below, are facing the sky. These star maps are sending their message into deep space. They weren't for us. This whole message is pretty much for people out there looking at us from out there with super telescopes who can decipher what it means. You make a Hubble telescope 20 times the size of the one we've got now, put it up into a solar system that's 300 light years away, point it in our direction, and use special optics and computers to focus it, you'll probably see these star maps. So I think this whole message is showing we are colonizing this world, this solar system, who we are, where we come from, by identifying the position of this face, its human form, and it's in the middle of the star map. It's telling a pictographic story. This is who we are and where we come from. We are colonizing the solar system.
Fascinating. 15 more minutes or so to get your questions in, folks. How did Mars get into the situation in which it is right now, if it was at one particular point the jewel of the solar system?
Yes, well, it's proven now with scientific research that it had oceans that would cover 2/3 of the planet, that the equatorial temperature would have been about 25 degrees C, which is really beautiful conditions for most comfortable living, and it has these weird anomalies that look like pyramids. And if you look at its position and its gravity, it was probably a bit bigger sized planet than it is now, because there's a crater on the far side of the planet that's 2,000 kilometers wide. That planet had a very sad ending, being impacted, and a lot of it being blasted off into space. So it's a dead planet literally now. I think the only life left there is probably microbial.
Oh, so you're not one of those folks that feel that Mars has been colonized by the secret government then?
I don't think so. It's just not right. If you look at all the pictures of the atmosphere and that, as they tilt the camera up, it goes black. It's like being in an aircraft. If you look outside an aircraft window when you're doing your travels, look upwards, you'll see it's black. You can't breathe in such low pressure like that, and it should have a bit more green in it, and I don't think that's happened. There's a few places near springs where it looks like water is oozing out of the ground. I've got 2 or 3 pictures on my website showing it could be moss, but it's struggling. It's so cold there. It varies between 1 or 2 degrees and going to minus 30, 40 degrees. It gets really cold.
Okay, yeah, I know that there's definitely a group of folks who feel as if the NASA pictures have been color altered so that they look red, but the planet itself is not. So there's, again, that's another one of those situations where you have different bits of information coming from different sources. But it is obvious that there was, at one particular point, life on Mars. That seems, I think, undeniable. Also, there was supposedly, and I don't know if this has fit into your research at all, a planet in between the Earth and Mars or something that ultimately was destroyed to sort of change the orbit of things. Did that come up at all in any of your research?
It definitely. My second book that didn't go out, that I'm probably making ebook covers, but I think Sitchin was generalizing this Nibiru story was what caused the asteroid belt. There's a very simple explanation for the asteroid belt and what ended Mars and what caused our biblical flood 10,000 years ago. That seems to be when this whole thing happened. Was because of the pull of Jupiter. There was another planet that was between Jupiter and Mars that had a moon, and perhaps because of the Saturn and Jupiter alignments from time to time over millions of years would tug on a moon around this planet, and the planet would lose its moon, and it would slowly catch up after millions of years with its moon, and the moon impacts the planet again. And what we have in the asteroid belt is the lost planet and its moon. The debris proves that it was once a planet. Scientists won't admit it, but it's such a simple thing. There's solid chunks of iron out there. The only way iron can form in a big asteroid is a solid chunk of iron, is because it's the remains of the core of a planet. The way that the molten planet distills all the heavy metals to its core, there are chunks of solid iron out there. So that's a lost planet. So I agree with the general Nibiru theory that there's big chunks out there that might come into contact or near the Earth, but I don't think there's anybody living on it. And Sitchin was a bit overboard thinking that there were people living on a dead planet that goes way out into the solar system, away from the sun at minus 223, that people would want to still live on that chunk of rock. I'm sorry. They could fly. They were the builders of the flying disc. They would have just colonized somewhere else.
Okay. Let's talk about, in our remaining few minutes, about your website, Oneism. And why did you put that website up? What is that? What is Oneism? Let's talk a little bit more in depth about that.
Yeah, that's the whole story of the spiritual origins of humanity. It's the spiritual, what is the soul, the astral body, what do we feel in the near-death experience, and of course the cosmic tree. So it looks at ancient religions, it looks at what we have as religions today, and looks at the commons, takes out all the matching detail on this cosmic tree, and then looks at ancient civilizations, mythology, and seeing how many reproduced stories there are of this exact same story that by statistics should be probable, measurably probable, more than just a theory that this cosmic tree exists, and how and why it was interpreted the way that it was. And that's what it's all about. It's looking at the history of the soul and my experience tied in with it, and what I was shown as being important, things that we need to change very urgently. Otherwise, there's quite a serious thing coming up. There's a very high probability that the Mayans ended their calendar on 2012 for a good reason, that thereafter it doesn't really matter. And there's a good chance that we're due for another Earth impact event, an Earth life extinction event, ELEE, extinction event. And it's a sad situation that there's so much suffering on this planet. This is what I felt in my near-death experience, and I want people to take this away with them. Imagine now if you could be, just for one moment, be a part of God and understand what God feels, this creation, this light, whatever it is, that suddenly that all souls are connected to God. I'm sure a lot of people believe that anyway, which isn't a big deal. But now what about those 2 billion suffering, starving people on this planet that are connected to God? That's 2 billion souls connecting, suffering with the creation. If that gets any worse, the best solution is for this terrible thing to happen. And I can't even say it comfortably because it's such a terrible thing that we'd have to lose so many because there's so much suffering just to solve the situation. How terrible is that? We've got to solve this ourselves. We need to get up and make the changes to stop the suffering in our world, stop the super rich from draining the system and put it back into society to stop this from happening.
But haven't we gone through that already? I mean, you're familiar, of course, with the stories of Atlantis and Lemuria,
yes.
The cataclysm of the Great Flood.
Yep.
Do you feel, don't you feel, even the Bible says that the rainbow was formed so that there's God's promise that he would not destroy the earth by flood again. It didn't say that there was the promise of asteroid impact. But do you not feel that maybe we sort of gotten beyond the super duper cataclysmic events, and maybe we're moving into another era where we can somehow institute change without having to go through such a horror?
You know what? This is the worst part of my experience at this cosmic tree was to see that there's a very good chance we have been protected for 10,000 years. This is something that has been, let's say, made scientists think that we've been safe. If you look at our Earth, it hasn't really been impacted for 10,000 years. There's a good chance that advanced entities out there have been deflecting all those rocks that have been coming our way, and we see them as one that, there's one that nearly missed. Oh, look at that. Is that a UFO near it? These sort of things have been happening for 10,000 years. They have been going out of their way to protect us because we had hope, and there was a chance that humanity would find its way to be a normal civilization and not have so much suffering and lost souls and suffering. That's basically it. And I'm sorry to say there's a very good chance of this impact event coming, whether it's Enlil or whatever this comet name is, or just a chunk of rock that's the size of a mountain. It is in the Revelations text. It's in the Nostradamus prophecies. It's in the basic prophecies of the American Indians, the Hopi, the Maya. It's a terrible thing to talk about, but I'm going to be adding a part to that website when I look at what I'm trying to reason this, how I can reason, why would the creation allow such a terrible thing to happen? It's the simple fact of putting your place in position of God, knowing that there's millions, billions, there's 2 billion people suffering. What would you do if you were the creation? Would you allow that to continue, or would you put a stop to it and naturally let those souls free? And you know what your answer would be? Let it happen. It's so terrible. It's just such a terrible thing to even reason. But we can stop that. And my whole thing that I was shown, because my reaction in my near-death experience to that was, no. We can make changes. And then the voice that came to me said, but what are you going to do that's so different? Who's going to listen to you? What can you change? How can you change your governments? And you have a feeling that you've got to at least make an effort and make a try. And that's what I'm asking people to do. And it's starting. I tell you what, this whole revolution thing, the Middle East have had the most suffering. Those people are really been through hardcore suffering with their families, having no food and housing, and they are standing up in the streets and saying the governments are corrupt. Time to step down. These people that have, for example, Mubarak took something like 70 billion profit from his position as leader of Egypt. I mean, where does the guy get 70 billion from? He must put that money back into society, and this is going to happen all around the world. I bet you now, this 4th of July that's coming up, watch what happens. Something is brewing, and I think people that are on this activism movements are spreading the word. It's time we make a stand, stop the manipulating, stop the profiteering. These people are super rich, and they talk about prosperity. They're talking about their richest people shaking hands and making deals and making millions, while the middleman is even coming into the picture as being enslaved and brought down to a level where he's going to work all hours of the day, long evenings, no weekends, just to keep these guys happy. That is our future if we let them carry on. It's got to stop now.
Well, let's not forget the fact that of the people that are simply dying from depleted uranium and all sorts of newfangled weapons. War is decimating the population of many of the other nations of this world. Something that seems so backward, so unevolved, and yet here we are, and so uncivilized, and yet here we are in supposedly a civilized, technologically advanced, and I use quotes, world, and yet we are literally killing ourselves. It's almost as if a single entity is methodically destroying itself. So that obviously is something that has to change as well, because obviously the super rich that you're speaking of are profiting off of the misery of others, and it seems as if there's some kind of an agenda out there to depopulate the world as well, which they seem
no doubt about it.
Going at. Yeah.
We are overpopulated, but it's because of the situation they've allowed it to happen like that. There's probably quite effective means to control the population. I'm sure a lot of these people in Africa don't want 10 children or 15 children that they can't feed. They would rather just have 2 children if they were just given the right situation. Education is the big thing. To put a price on learning and knowledge, that's one of the things I found as well when I queried the cosmic tree, like, what are we doing so wrong? The absolute disgust of putting a price on learning and knowledge to build your own country up. You've got to pay for it in parts of the world. I mean, in my country, the cost of a good education, a good university education costs more than a house and a car. I mean, where does that come from? There's a lot of things really wrong, and a lot of these countries that have got the situation cannot get learning and knowledge. We've reached the computer age. We can make this all visible on an internet-type system where everybody can get it for free. There should be no price, and there'll be a better education if it's presented in beautiful visual pictures like movies for a lot of these people. I think any child will tell you, if they watch a science program where there's a bit of entertainment value and they're showing how the atom works, you'll learn it in 1 minute flat, how an atom works at 7 years old, just watching a very good graphic. And it will compared to what it takes somebody in a class who's a teenager, what would take hours. So there's a way to teach and learn, and we've got to change. We've got to make those adjustments.
I also think, in conjunction with what you're saying, is obviously if there's going to be teaching and learning and education, then the education has to be of the truth. It seems as if a lot of the information that children are getting in school, whether it's particularly in regards to history, perhaps even in some ways certain parts of science and biology, aren't necessarily really reflecting the truth. So the education itself has to come with the knowledge of some of the things that you've researched, who we are, where we came from, what our potential is.
They've taken the most exciting parts out of history and made it forbidden. The pyramids, the reasons for them. What I learned in history, and I actually dropped the subject, I was so appalled with it, is all the battles of war, who fought and who won what, and learning all the dates for it. I actually dropped history. I hated it with a passion. And then it became, after my life near-death experience, I became passionate about ancient history. All the stuff that was forbidden was stuff that was uplifting. They've taken all the good stuff out of it. Why? It's a hidden agenda. It's stuff that is proudly owned by those that think it should only be for their brethren of highest level. People that are of the richest of rich maybe can be allowed to share the secret. Forget it. It's for people. It's for humanity. The time is now to get it out and let people see who they are and where they come from. And I guarantee you, if every single person in one day, if there was some magical media, I could put my stuff on the air just so that everybody gets to see it. You watch everybody the next day start working to change the system. Because it's such a simple thing to know who you are. Once you have that, it seems to lift some kind of hypnotic control. I've never thought much about mind control in television, and is it really possible that they can lull us into believing that we're all happy and everybody must sing hallelujah and go to work and just work and be happy and forget about negative things? We seem to be literally hypnotized to do that. They did worship a sun, but it's a sun-like star. But it's not ours. It's somewhere in Taurus. It's something that our ancestors came from, somewhere in space in Taurus.
You don't have a particular theory as to which star it was?
Yeah, so once you get all these star maps together, for example, Stonehenge, look at the template, look at it from above, and all the others, and compare this ground zero, most important monument position in reference to this cluster of 7 monuments nearby, you can simply go to a star program and measure what fits with which I thought was the Pleiades, and see what star comes into contention that fits into that point.
Okay. Do you mention that star in your book by any chance?
Yes. According to the data at the time, in 2002 when we published it, we have a sun-like star that fits in that position right about 17,000 years ago. I still think that is the highest probability of being the solution to it, because it fits in such a neat way, especially in the Mars star map, where it lands on the forehead of the most amazing monument on Mars, the Mars face. It lands right in the middle of the forehead, in position at a specific date. So I'm still pretty sure that is the right one. It's about 300 to 400 light years distance, exactly like our sun, class G spectral type, and it's there. You can measure it.
It's in the Pleiades, that particular star?
It's near the Pleiades. The Pleiades are pretty much a sky landmark, if you can call it that. It's a reference position. If you look at the size of the Pleiades and measure one length of that Pleiades star shape and follow down the leg shape, it actually follows this leg is literally a pointer in the sky to find the position of it. So it's a matter of an overlay to measure its exact position.
So then you are saying that our ancestors, or the ancestors, that certainly the ones that Ra and his entourage would have come from a planet within that particular star system where that sun shone.
Absolutely. Flesh and blood gods, our ancestors, coming from a sun-like star system, and it's a tradition that seems told in so many different ways in different cultures, the exact same story in all different cultures around the world.
Then my question would be, because given the diversity of human races now, through the black, the white, the brown, the red, yellow, would it have been one specific race from that star system, according to how...
Rain erosion on it, and if you look at it very carefully, it's sand and rain that have gullied down and eroded some of those blocks. It's very, very likely it is the oldest. But I think it's quite likely Memphis was the beginning of a civilization. My own personal theory is it's quite likely that the Sphinx was the ground zero landing monument.
Okay, that would be for Ra and in his spaceship.
Well, yeah, this is the thing. How do we prove Ra came in a spaceship? And it is luckily some of my newer work that I think I found the literal blueprint of what it looked like.
Let me ask you this. Who is Ra?
I think the best way to describe him is he is the great figurehead of the first landing party of the people who founded Egypt. Yeah.
No, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut into you there. I did want to ask you this. Is this the same deity as Amun-Ra or Amun-Ra, or is it a different one?
I think it's the same. Variations of the belief has, I think, evolved over time, and I think even in the beginnings, even the fundamental basis of their religion being this creational God with Nut and Geb, even that varies. So that the real earliest, let's call it mythology, is variant. So to be exactly sure, it's hard to say, but I would say Ra still stands out as one of the earliest and the most important.
So can you tell us a little bit about that and how it affected and influenced Egyptian civilization, the coming of Ra onto the planet?
Yeah, in the earliest sort of records of mythology of Egypt, it has this creational myth with Nut being a female goddess stretched forth over the heavens, and from her womb gives birth to a son. And historians have said, well, that's probably our son being born. But if you look at the context of Nut and the womb, the sacred feminine in its position, looking at all the images, there's about 8 of them that seem to depict a very tiny little sun-like star, and it's in reference to a position of a leg symbol. Now, the leg symbol, according to some of the coffin lids found with the priestess of Hathor and a few others, show that it is a group of 7 stars, and it has the shape that it depicts a leg-type shape. When you look at the collective 7 stars, and it's a bull's leg, and it's in Taurus. And it's not our sun at all. That's a huge difference. So my work contradicts the basis of sun worship being, it's not really our sun, but yes.
Question about symbols, because it seems as if the ancients really wrote in symbols, and even these star maps are symbols. What is the significance of symbols? Why were they so important, and why were they used so extensively back then?
Yeah, that's something I've never been asked before, but I think the easiest way to reason that would perhaps be the earliest writings were pictoglyphs or pictures, like a man walking, doing something, and from cave paintings they developed into simple sort of symbols, as the word describes, little pictographs and short versions of these pictures and telling a story. And over time, I would say became, in some languages, became completely, let's say, evolved in many different ways and into something that had no resemblance to pictures and became words and speech.
So, but now even today, because I think that as we continue to talk later on, we'll bring all of this up later on, but even some of the major cities are built symbolically according to your research. So they're still using these symbols. Do you see any significance in that and in their designing some of these cities according to these star maps?
Yeah, there are some common symbols that seem to have had meaning in all cultures, and in a way almost universal symbols that are common in all languages, which is very strange because in theory, each civilization would have, in theory, started its own writing. However, all of them seem to have connections in some way. So it seems to be this outside connection of common important symbols that are sacred and tell a story that's been forgotten.
Let me ask you this too. Now, when after you had compiled a sufficient amount of notes in your research, and you were at a point of trying to put them all together, and then you read some works by Dr. Robert Bauval, and it seemed to really orient you into a specific way of thinking and into a specific line of research. First of all, who is Dr. Bauval, and how did that what did you read that influenced your research so much?
Yeah, I don't believe he's a doctor, but Robert Bauval, the author, is probably the pioneer of identifying the star secret of the pyramids, and that's quite an amazing thing. He put it really on the map to start with. He had the basis identified, and his interpretation was mainly the three pyramids of Giza with the three stars of Orion, and he had a template that he thought would explain it just using the larger pyramids. For example, the two other larger pyramids in Saqqara, the Red Pyramid, and I'm trying to think of the other one. Anyway, but basically using mainly the big pyramids as part of a star map, but leaving out the little ones. And I just simply went back and re-looked at it and seeing if it was possible to fit the whole cosmos in one 360-degree star view of 50 pyramids matching a string of 50 stars, and that seemed to tell a complete story.
Now, but let me ask you this: these pyramids were not all built at the same time, though, were they not?
How do you date these things? There's quite a very I would say that the best way to look at it is the earliest part of Egypt, for example, was around the area of Memphis, and Memphis was by the chance, the middle of the pyramid field. It's quite likely they started with some of the biggest ones first in Giza, and you never know, but perhaps these things were built in a matter of a 20-year plan. To me, that's still pretty much at the same time, but there was, for example, Sneferu, who built 3 of the pyramids, in his lifetime. So these things are going up a lot quicker than people would like to accept.
Well, the only question that I would have is the structure of the Giza pyramids and their size is so different, at least from what I understand, from the other pyramids that are in Egypt. that it would almost indicate that they had some larger purpose, or maybe they were built, by a different group of people. Would you agree with that?
Not really. If you think, for example, let's take the step pyramid. Looks like a very rough, raw, experimental kind of first pyramid being built, and then you look at Giza and you see, whoa, these blocks are, were dressed a lot better and a lot smoother, a lot bigger. There is some slight variances in some of them, but you'll see that the inside of even of Giza, right in the very inner parts, are very rough and very raw, and perhaps a step pyramid shape structure is underneath some of the better ones as well. So I think every single one of them had a clear, smooth outer surface, and that's something that's yet to be proven. But over a 20-year period, depending on who the builders were in that over that 20 or 30 year, whatever it was, it's still pretty much in one lifetime. It's quite likely that they all went up in one sort of period.
And would you say that would be the same for the other pyramids as well, that are around the planet?
Speaking on the Mayan would be probably the biggest one out of the whole lot. The Olmec, Aztec, Mayan. I think those were over a much longer period, and the whole religion, the whole belief and blueprint, if you can call it seemed to vary towards the end of their civilization. Perhaps about 1,000 years ago, it became a whole different basis for building them. For example, they were building them towards the end of their civilization, celebrating periodic cycles with two pyramids going up as pairs, celebrating a time span matching the Mayan calendar, which is completely different to how it seems they were built in the beginning, which was to map the stars.
Okay. And since we're on the subject of pyramids, and then because there's so much that you've researched and so much I'd like to touch on, I don't want to stay on the pyramids, but I do want to ask you this. The pyramids that have been recently discovered in Eastern Europe, how do you feel they fit into the star map and into your research?
In fact, I think every single one, and I don't think there's one that stands out differently. For example, Göbekli Tepe is the one that's on the map at the moment. They're not hardly pyramids, but there are these sort of Stonehenge type, let's call them buildings, or whatever you want to call them, but had some sort of megalithic structure. Every single one of them, and I include Stonehenge as well, of course, seem to have the same sun worship connection. They seem to have the same star measuring obsessions, and definitely I think all of them seem to be tied into visitors, gods that came down from the sky.
Let's go back now to Egypt, and let's go to the Sphinx for a minute, because I believe in your work you say that the Sphinx was built before the pyramids. That is correct?
Yeah, I would go with that. I would say the Sphinx might not have been. Look, nobody will ever really be able to prove this. I would say the most logical way of looking at the Sphinx is taking Robert Skoch's discovery that it has